If you enjoy this podcast, show us some love and take a couple minutes to leave a 5-star review. It helps us get found by more listeners, and we greatly appreciate it. Aphantasia is a condition characterized by an inability to visualize mental images in one's mind. If you have just discovered that you or someone you love has aphantasia, or if you're just fascinated by the subject in general and love learning more about it, you are in the right place. The Discovering Your Mind podcast delves into all aspects of the mind's eye, including aphantasia, hyperphantasia, and everything in between. Welcome to the Discovering Your Mind podcast, brought to you by shanesbraindomain.com. I am your host, Shane Williams, also known as Shane's Brain. So last January, I decided to start a podcast about the mind's eye, essentially. Everything from aphantasia to hyperphantasia, as well as other internal senses. My idea was to take the Discovering Your Mind protocol that I had developed over the years, a series of questions designed to help people discover how they do or don't visualize, and simply bring guests on and ask them the questions. I had been doing this off the air for years, and I knew how absolutely fascinating the results were. So I thought this would be a fun way to interview more people and document to the world just how beautifully unique each individual actually is when it comes to our internal senses and experiences. I feel that this podcast has been successful in that objective. It has been a thrill and a pleasure to talk to the people who have come on this podcast, and I learned something new and interesting with each interview. When I started the podcast a year ago, I committed myself to sticking with it for at least a year, releasing one episode a week. There are 52 weeks in a year, so that meant 52 episodes. I released the 52nd episode last week, so here we are. Time to reflect and discuss what the future holds. Frankly, I'm kind of exhausted. I am super proud of what we have done here over the last year, but in all honesty, it was an absolute ton of work. I'm not 100% sure what the future of the podcast is going to be, but I know this for sure. I'm taking a break. For this final episode, at least for now, I want to discuss a few additional thoughts I have on the subject matter and a few other things with you today. But before I get into that, I would like you to consider something real quick. Think about how much you tip a server when you go out to eat. Based on how well the meal or the service was, you send a few bucks their way, or probably much more than a few bucks in many instances. I'm willing to bet that even if the meal wasn't all that great and the service was lacking, you probably still leave a tip. Or think about how much you spend to see a stand-up comedian or go to a movie or a concert. You pay for those things because they hold value. I want you to, for a moment, think about if this podcast has held any value for you, if it has meant anything to you at all, if all of our blood, sweat, and tears over the last year has meant anything to you. If so, please consider leaving us a tip. Send a few bucks our way to show us that you appreciate this effort that we have put forward. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/shanesbrain or podcast.discoveringyourmind.com, or you can Venmo me at Shane's Brain. You can also go to shanesbraindomain.com and purchase shirts and books as a way to say thank you for our efforts in bringing you this podcast. I have a book about aphantasia and the mind's eye called Aphantasia and Beyond. I also have 3 children's books. The Endless Achoo is about a guy who is allergic to his own sneezes. The other 2 books are compilations of funny poems. I'm going to read one poem from each of these books real quick because I love these poems. They're part of me, and because this is my podcast and I can. This first poem is from my book All Mixed Up, and it's called Deadly Homework. It's obvious that science is not my favorite class, and Mrs. Nog, my teacher, doesn't think that I will pass. She's heard all my excuses about where my homework went. She won't believe a thing I say. Her patience has been spent. So last night I did my homework, 'cause I didn't want to fail, but my chemical experiment just didn't go too well. The jar that I had mixed it in tipped over on Mom's plants. They grew some teeth and came alive and did a spooky dance. I tried to think of something. They were drooling on the floor. So I grabbed them all and threw them out and quickly slammed the door. Today I have a new excuse to tell to Mrs. Nog, but I doubt that she'll believe me. My homework ate my dog. Okay, this next one is from my book, The Sun is on Fire, and it's called Remember That Day? I remember that day when I didn't go skiing. It's no doubt the best time that I never had. I remember that one part that I can't remember. Not thinking about it just makes me feel glad. I remember the feeling of none of it happening. I'll never forget the way I wasn't there, the way I never rode up on the ski lift, the way that the breeze never blew through my hair. I remember not wanting the day to not end, and hoping not skiing would last for not ever. I remember that day just like it never happened. It was without question the greatest day never. Okay, thank you for allowing me a moment to do that. This podcast has extreme value to me, and I hope you will consider leaving a tip in one of those ways that I mentioned. All right, now I would like to share a few more of my thoughts and experiences surrounding aphantasia and the mind's eye before I sign off for a while. In my ongoing effort to better understand and explain my brain, I found it interesting how Cole recently described his own thoughts as herding cats or chaos. I wonder how many people, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum, would describe their thoughts as chaos. I know I certainly wouldn't. Even when my thoughts are somewhat negative or worrisome, they are not chaotic. They are always quiet and somewhat soft. For lack of a better analogy, I've described my thoughts as being in the other room. I guess what I mean by that is that they are not front and center. They are not in my face. If you have a gang of rowdy children running around screaming and throwing things, if you are right in the middle of it, it's very chaotic. But if you go into the other room and close the door, the level of chaos decreases, even though you can still hear what is going on in the next room. This is what my mind is like. It's like I'm somewhat removed from them. They are there, but in the other room. But beyond that, my quote-unquote children are rarely rowdy. They are usually well-behaved. And when they aren't, I just focus on the calm, peaceful room that I am actually in and realize that those thoughts over there, misbehaving, are not me. And they can only influence me if I allow them to. This also got me thinking that it might be fun to compare our thoughts to other people. For example, if you describe your thoughts as chaotic, and you were asked to compare your thoughts to one of your relatives, you might choose your nephew because he is always bouncing off the walls. Or if you were asked to compare them to a coworker, you might choose Debbie because she talks constantly and won't leave you alone. Or you might be asked to compare them to a celebrity. In my case, I think I would choose Bob Ross to describe my mind. But even then, he's still on in the other room. Anyway, I thought that would be a fun exercise for you to do and to think about, and I will certainly work something like that into my future interviews if and when I return. Another thing we have talked about quite a bit on the podcast is the idea of waving a magic wand and getting rid of our aphantasia. I've always said that I would like to take it for a test drive, and as I thought more about that analogy, I think it actually fits in perfectly with the fact that everyone is so unique, just like every car is unique. If you take a particular car for a test drive, you are experiencing what that car is like, and that car alone. You can't know what all the other cars on the lot are like by driving just one of them. So the question is, if I were to take visualization or the entire inner senses for a test drive, whose version would I take? And would that be enough? I might want to select many different versions to test drive. And if I did that, would my curiosity ever let me stop? I think all of us would be amazed at how different our internal experiences are if we could actually experience them. Another thing I would like to talk about real quick is my dreams. I have always had a very difficult time understanding and describing how I dream. For a long time, I couldn't tell if they were visual, but the more I have paid attention to them, the more I have decided that my dreams are visual in a very mysterious way that I can't quite figure out. But a few nights ago, I had the most vivid dream I have ever had. For the first time, I could actually tell that my dream was in first person. I was flying over a lake and some mountains. I'm not sure, but I sensed that I was in a helicopter or something. As we flew over the land by the lake, there were all these individual booths where people could get married, and I could see all of this in a vivid way that I have never before in a dream. And I could see the white bows and decorations on the poles and booths. This is the first time I have ever been able to identify color in my dreams, like 100% sure color. Then I was in the customer service area, and the lady that worked there was being really rude to me. And for the first time ever, I was able to identify that I was hearing in my dream. I actually heard her voice, her tone, everything. And then my friend Robbie showed up, and I saw and heard him. Now let me try to explain this if I can. I have had many dreams where I could tell what happened, but this is the only one I've ever had where I feel like I experienced what happened, if that makes any sense. The only one that actually resembled actual reality in any way, where I could actually identify colors and sounds and visuals. This has only happened to me that one time. Now I would like to take a moment to talk about some of my future projects. Like I said, I don't know what the future holds for this podcast, but my thoughts are that I will probably return at some point, but it's probably going to be more sporadic. I know I would like to do more panel discussions in the future, and there are certain interviews I would not pass up if the opportunity arose. For instance, I would love to interview someone who is blind, someone who has been blind from birth, as well as someone who became blind later in life. I would also be interested in talking to someone who developed aphantasia later in life and remembers what it was like to visualize. Another one that interests me is someone who has been successful in reversing aphantasia in any way on any level. I also have plans to write another book on the mind's eye. My first book, Aphantasia and Beyond, is relatively short, and I plan to write a new book that is at least 3 times as long. So keep an eye out for that. One thing I have done a couple times that I would like to do more in the future is workshops and presentations about aphantasia and the mind's eye. So if you know of a conference or other setting where this type of presentation would be a good fit, please reach out to me. Even something like an assembly at a high school or middle school, I think would be a good place to bring this information to people's awareness. Another thing I'm working on is turning some of my children's poems into children's songs. I have been using AI to help me with this, and it has been a blast. I have worked on these songs quite a bit, and I have several of them close to where I want them. The next step is to find someone to help me fine-tune them and increase quality so I can release an album. I want to share a couple of them with you now, because I can. This one is called Bad Idea.
I was walking down the street when trouble started forming. It frankly caught me off my guard, it happened without warning. Somebody's dog came up to me, he didn't sit or beg, just sniffed at me a little bit, then lifted up his leg. I guess it was a bad idea, if you know what I mean, to be a fire hydrant this year for Halloween. I guess it was a bad idea, if you know what I mean, to be a fire hydrant this year for Halloween. Yeah, that was a bad idea.
And this one is called Retirement Plan.
While I was at my granny's house, I lost one of my teeth. I lifted up my pillow and I put it underneath. When morning came, I looked beneath the pillow on my bed. The tooth was gone, a dollar bill was lying there instead. I ran into my granny's room and flung open the door. Her teeth were sitting in a jar, just like the night before. Grams, I yelled, you did it wrong. You really need to switch. Put them under your pillow tonight, and Grandma will be rich. Put them under your pillow tonight, and Grandma will be rich. Oh! at my granny's house. I lost one of my teeth. I lifted up my pillow and I put it underneath. When morning came, I looked beneath the pillow on my bed. The tooth was gone, a dollar bill was lying there instead. I ran into my granny's room and flung open the door. Her teeth were sitting in a jar, just like the night before. "Grams," I yelled, "you did it wrong. You really need to switch. Put them under your pillow tonight, and Grandma, we will be rich. Put them under your pillow tonight, and Grandma, we will be rich."
Okay, now I would like to offer some thank yous before I end. First of all, I would like to thank each and every one of my guests who gave their time to be interviewed and share their mind with all of us. It was a truly magical experience for me to spend time with each one of you. I learned so much from our time together, and your answers and insights are so valuable to my research. Next, I would like to thank the two researchers that appeared on my show. We had Johanna Nethergaard, who is a researcher on anendophagia, or the lack of an inner voice. And just last week, we had Adam Zeman. If you don't know who that is, look it up and you'll see what a big deal it is that he shared with us his time and his expertise. As I said before, when I started this podcast, I committed to 52 episodes. I contacted Adam Zeman early on, but he wasn't available until recently. Without any planning whatsoever, his interview ended up being number 52. It just worked out that way, and I think that's pretty cool. Thank you so much, Johanna and Adam, for your contributions. And a gigantically huge thank you to my co-host and son, Cole Williams. You made the podcast infinitely better than it would have been without you. I can't tell you how much Cole's presence and influence is appreciated by me. He added so much insight and knowledge to the episodes he was a part of, and I just can't thank him enough for his help, support, and contributions to the podcast. Next, I would like to thank each and every one of you out there who has listened to the podcast. I'm so grateful you have given the Discovering Your Mind podcast a chance and a listen. Thank you to those who have shared the podcast with friends and loved ones. I really do appreciate that. And a huge thank you to the few of you who have donated to the cause, and hopefully a few more of you will consider doing so as well. Thank you all for listening to the Discovering Your Mind podcast. You are beautifully unique.
I've got the chimpanzee sneezes, it hurts like you wouldn't believe. When I sneeze, a chimpanzee comes out. Try wiping that on your sleeve. I've got the chimpanzee sneezes, it hurts like you wouldn't believe. When I sneeze, a chimpanzee comes out.